Look at me.
Sure.
I'm the captain now.
Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whoever you're doing it with, and however much fun you're having while doing it, welcome. Welcome to my channel, Legal Vices. Today is, of course, Maritime Monday, where we're talking about things maritime. For those of you that watched last week, I don't know if any of you did watch last week. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but you might be noticing a little bit of a theme here. And by the way, it's we have snorting, toy playing, heavy breathing, snoring dogs here. So please forgive all of the weird little grunty noises that come from the floor level here. It's the dogs. Anyway, as I was saying, I don't know how many of you watched last week when we talked a little bit about the sinking of the Carl D. Bradley in 1958. Well, if you watch that, you may sort of get a feeling that you're watching a repeat of last week's show, because there are several similarities. Where should we start? I guess starting with we have to look at the most famous of the Great Lake wrecks, probably the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And again, go back several months in the playlist, and you'll see my video that I did on the Edmund Fitzgerald. But there's a couple of times, I think three times in there that just a minute, the dog is bothering the hell out of me. Hey, come here. Come here. Time to rescue the toy. Hey, right over here. Got this hard, chewy plastic toy that all I can hear is behind me. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but I was just hearing that. Sorry, doggy. Go find another toy to play with. Let's try this all over again. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the song "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald" makes three references to November. At the end of the first verse, where it says, "The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy." The next verse also mentions this as that good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. And then later on in the song it says, "And every man knew as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing." November is when winter settles in there to the Great Lakes. And there's one more reference. There's two more references, actually. There's actually two more references. I just pulled up the lyrics here right at the end. "And the iron boats go, as the mariners all know, with the gales of November remembered. And Superior, they said, never gives up her dead when the gales of November come early." That's when the winter settles in on the lake. That's when we get the storms, the winter storms coming in, the ice, the snow, the gales, the wind, essentially what are lake hurricanes at that point. No, there are not clouds on my pants. There's like a green, purple, and turquoise hearts. Why? Yes, I learned from watching other podcasts that pants are a necessity. Anywho, the November storms on the Great Lakes were a real thing. Absolutely a real thing. If we look at the video we did last week with the Carl D. Bradley, that went down on November 18th, 1958. Today, we're going to be talking about the SS Daniel J. Morrell, which went down 8 years later. 8 years later, on nearly the same day. It was 11 days later, on the 29th of November. So you've got the Carl Bradley going down on the 18th of November. You've got the 8 years later, the Daniel J. Morrell going down on the 29th of November. And then just 9 years later, you have the Edmund Fitzgerald going down on the 10th of November. So these November storms are a real thing. And that's where we're looking at the middle of these three ships. The Morrell. We've done the Fitzgerald. We did the Bradley last week, and so we're doing the Morrell this week. And I wish it was a better story than the other two. It's not as famous as the Fitzgerald. And if you recall from last week, the Carl D. Bradley, there was 2 survivors. This is slightly worse. There's only one survivor of today's shipwreck, and he just died recently. So here we go. Let's talk a little bit about this particular ship. It wasn't the largest, because we said we had the Queen of the Lakes was always the largest ship, as we'll talk about in the video. And again, while we're mentioning it, the video this week comes from the Maritime Horrors, which we've been looking at. And why have I closed my video window? Probably because I'm dumb. There you go. I brought it back up again. Again, this video comes from Maritime Horrors, which is where the Carl D. Bradley video came from last time. The link to this video without my commentary is down there. Maritime Horrors is one of my favorite channels. Like I said, they seem to be cool with with me using their videos as the basis for the discussions. They have a bajillion more viewers than me, like Brick and Mortar, 2 great channels. But go to Maritime Horrors, and that's just the channel name, Maritime Horrors. And make sure, if this is what you're into, you subscribe to their video, like this video, like all the other videos, and you should find some fascinating stuff there. Because I love it, and it's been a regular source here, and nobody's crushed me yet. So I assume that they're cool with it, because if I was them, I'd be cool with me too. So let's go back to talking about the ship. But Maritime Horrors is the channel, and the link is down below. Oh gosh, this ship was built. Like I said, it wasn't the Queen of the Lakes because its sister ship was 1 foot longer. It missed being the Queen of the Lakes by 1 foot. So it was the second largest ship out there. It was built in the first few years of the 20th century, and it made its first voyage in 1906. And it was, for that point, it was huge. It was over 600 feet long, which is like 200 meters, I guess, if you're keeping score in metric areas. And it hauled iron ore, other cargoes around the Great Lakes for 60 years. And the Edward Townsend was the Queen of the Lakes. That was a sister ship that was 1 foot longer. But this accident took place, as I said, on November 29th of 1966. And again, like the Bradley, if you recall, it was the last voyage of the season. It was scheduled to be the last voyage, and bad things. And if I recall correctly, too, the Edmund Fitzgerald was on the last voyage of the season as well. So last voyage problems. I don't like to use the word curse, but November, last run of the season for all 3 ships, if I recall correctly. So the 2 ships, the Townsend and the Morrell, were out on the lake, and there was a huge storm that came up. Essentially, it was one of these lake hurricanes. The winds were reaching 60 miles an hour. The waves were 25 feet high. So you're looking at 25 feet, 10 feet, 20. Yeah, like, what is that? 9 meters ish now, a little less than that. It's about 8 meters. And again, exactly the same thing that happened with the Carl D. Bradley. The ship broke in half. But the real hero of the story, we'll talk a lot about that, but we'll also be talking about the real hero of this story, was a man named Dennis Hale. Dennis Hale was the only survivor of this accident. And you'll recall from the Carl Bradley that there was 3 guys that were in a lifeboat, and they were getting 3 or 4 guys in a lifeboat. They were constantly falling out and having to crawl back in, falling out, having to crawl back in. And eventually some of them couldn't crawl back in. Others just died of hypothermia. Well, that's pretty much, again, what happened here. 3 people there in the boat, and Dennis Hale was the only one that survived after being in this life raft in these weather conditions for 40 hours. And he died in September 2015 of cancer, and he was 75 years old at that point. There's some good videos of him, some documentaries and some interviews with him on YouTube. You just look at Dennis Hale. They're interesting things to watch. There was one that I really wanted to watch, but it was so full of copyrighted music that there's just no way it would survive. So just go search for Dennis Hale at the end of the show if that's what you're interested in doing. And now the vessel is still at the bottom of the ocean. It's still down there. It's under it's in Lake Huron, just about 200 feet underwater. And they narrowly avoided another accident. The shipping company narrowly avoided another accident. Because I said, during the storm, this ship, the Morrell, broke up into two pieces and sank. But it was there with its sister ship, who was also, one of the largest ships on the lake for a long time. That was also that ship's last voyage, the Townsend. Because after they finished that voyage, they finished that trip in November, and they noticed that there was a huge crack in the hull of that ship. So it likely would have broke up on its next voyage. But luckily they saw it, and they retired that ship as well. But again, that's the dangers of the maritime industry, particularly on the Great Lakes and in November. Also on YouTube, there's a song about the Daniel J. Morrell that again, I never heard back from the person, so I don't know. God, these dogs are just like snorting around in me. Come on, guys, I'm trying to do something here. There's a song called I think it's called "The Sinking of the Daniel J. Morrell." I tried to get the guy to respond to the email so that we could play it here, but I never got an answer, and I just don't want to risk the copyright strike. So, all right, just want to say welcome to everybody. That's it. That's where we're going with this show today. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to wrap it up at about 45 minutes, not 45 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes from now, when I'll be starting the next day of the trial in the Zachariah Anderson trial, which we should just dump you automatically into the waiting line for that. We should have some guests for that tonight too, but we're not going to be talking about that here. You see, Carol Bummer says the dogs are fine. I don't hear them and they don't bother me. That's all I hear. I just hear like bulldogs snorting, licking, breathing, and huffing like right around my feet. It is ridiculously distracting tonight. Usually they're asleep. Oh, Scory says, "What's that picture on your sweatshirt?" Legal Vices. This is a shirt from one of my favorite bands. This is the Bridge City Sinners. So yeah, you're gonna Bridge City Sinners are a great band. That's one of their album covers. So if you're interested in the Bridge City Sinners, go check them out. They're their own genre. They're sort of punk, folk, metal, bluegrass band. They're great. Okay. Let's see what we've got before we jump into the main body of the show this evening. First of all, I want to thank all of you that participated in the F It Friday stream last week. That was pretty darn epic. It had a whole bunch of fun, and I survived to tell this tale yet again. So we're all glad about that. And let's see, we have one super chat all the way up here at the very, very top, at the very, very beginning. So don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. We can do that while I scroll back up for the super chat at the top. Where did the super chat? There we are. Sky is a neighborhood. Oh, I got your tweet, by the way. We'll talk. Not meaning to assume Boat's gender identity, but thought they were all considered she's. How is this one a Daniel? Even though the name was Daniel, it would still be called a she. Figured out. Never mind, not going to get into that. I was going to make lots of jokes that would probably offend everybody's ear holes. All right, take the like and subscribe poll. Make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and take our like and subscribe poll. For the first time, oh, I was I was just about ready to say for the first time ever, we have more likes than people who took the poll, but that instantly changed. Now we're back to normal, where more people have taken the like poll than have actually subscribed. So hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, make sure you're still subscribed if you already did, and take the poll. Today's poll is: like and subscribe buttons were smashed because you survived another Effort Friday, because we want more Maritime Mondays, or because, oh, I put because twice, because I'm a mind-numbed robot. Or the final choice is like and subscribe buttons were smashed because
the power of Christ compels you.
I never get enough of that clip. All right. Well, here we are. Welcome, everybody, to the show. We're going to get into the main body of the video right now, and we'll do the usual stop, talk, and comment as we go along. And I'll be following along in the chat. So the things that I can get to in the chat, we'll get to. And as always, I just ended that damn poll, didn't I? Well, I'll put up another one. I'll put up another one. Why not? We'll do it again. Same questions. Super chats are not required. I'll try to address as many of the regular as I can, but any super chat is guaranteed to be read, addressed, and replied to, because you're parting with your hard-earned cash. That's the least I can do, is make sure and guarantee that I will get to it. And let's jump into this, and I'll put up another poll because, hey, why not? Okay. And again, this is on the Maritime Horrors channel. That's where I get this base video from.
The 29th of November, 1966. A freighter northbound on Lake Huron battles through stormy seas. A familiar occurrence befalls it as it splits in half and sinks with tremendous loss of life, just as it occurred not a decade before with the Carl D. Bradley. But while the story of the Daniel J. Morrell isn't unique, the tale of survival that goes along with it is. Because one can't discuss the loss of the Carl D. Bradley without also talking about the miraculous survival of one of its crew, Dennis Hale, who, in the face of insurmountable odds, made it home alive when every one of his shipmates didn't. The year is 1906, and the Great Lakes are as alive as ever with traffic and big industry. Ships getting steadily larger and larger to fuel America's burgeoning industrial needs. This year, in April, the massive 601-foot Pierpont Morgan would be launched and crowned the Queen of the Lakes, an unofficial title for the lengthiest vessel currently sailing the Great Lakes. She beat out the prior vessel by nearly 50 feet, but not long after this, in August, the SS Edward Y. Townsend was launched, an impressive...
I mean, now, that's not that impressive, 600 feet. But if you look at 110 years ago, 112 years ago, that was a monster of a ship.
Of 603 feet, claiming the title of queen. A month later, her unofficial sister ship, the Daniel J. Morrell, would be launched from the West Bay shipbuilding yards in West Bay City, Michigan. Though a foot shorter and made in two separate yards, the Townsend and Morrell were both commissioned by the same Cambria Steamship Company and were nearly identical in construction, thus leading to the ships being called sister ships. The twin behemoths steaming under the same banner and carrying the same cargo. Their fates seemed to be intertwined, as time would soon show. The Daniel J. Morrell, upon her construction, was 603 feet in length and 58 feet at the beam. The large freighter had a 32-foot depth and an impressive 7,239 gross registered ton displacement. She initially had two Scotch Marine boilers producing 1,878 horsepower, her propulsion being a triple expansion steam engine. In 1922, she would actually be outfitted with a gyro compass, becoming the first freighter on the lakes to be fitted with one. Morrell and her sister ship Townsend entered service with the Cambria Steamship Company and chartered them to work for the M.A. Hanna Company until 1930, when they changed management to the Bethlehem Transportation Company until their final days. All through this time, the pair putting forth some impressive hauling numbers and proving to be very profitable and reliable. In 1945, the Daniel J. would receive a major refit modernization.
Now, again, we've seen a few times here on these refits and modernizations where they tend to skirt around safety issues. They tend not to, perchance, be as careful as they should be with making the calculations and things necessary to maintain stability and safety of the ships. Not the case here. These ships were solid ships.
Its older Scotch Marine boilers were replaced by newer Babcock and Wilcox boilers, nearly doubling her horsepower to 3,200. Her engine was replaced in 1956 with a 3-cylinder Skinner Uniflow engine, increasing her overall speed a few knots. But engineers also noted a slight vibration at higher RPMs. In total, this added an additional 500 tons to the ship's displacement, and ended up increasing the overall length to 609 feet, with other additions. The 1966 season for the Daniel J. Morrell was going along smoothly. For Captain Arthur I. Crawley, age 47, this was his first year in command of the Morrell. Born in Cuyahoga, Ohio in 1919, Captain Crawley had spent 29 years on the Great Lakes freighters, gaining his master's certification just a few years prior. But this would be his first year as a captain. But the season had been prosperous. Morrell had just gotten out of a dry dock at the beginning of the season, receiving a dry dock inspection on the 25th of February during her dry docking in Toledo, Ohio. Shortly after this, she received her yearly inspection, again in Toledo, on the 15th of April.
So now these dry dock and these yearly inspections are incredibly detailed inspections, particularly like all of the ships have classification societies where, I mean, these societies will determine if this ship is safe to sail or not. And they do these amazingly in-depth surveys, and they go through these massive checklists where they're checking all kinds of things. And if some are fix when you can, some are fix on the next voyage, others are you do not sail until these are fixed. And they go down this checklist, and depending on the results of that, they can rip your classification status and you don't sail until you fix things. So we're looking at some pretty detailed stuff, particularly if it was a classification survey inspection that they were doing. But when they move the ship in dry dock, that's literally what they do. They haul it up out of the ocean and they put it in a dry space. It's a dry dock, and that's where they work on the ship. That's where you do the underside work and all that other stuff. And that's it lets you get into places in the ship and see things you wouldn't normally see if it was afloat.
Finally receiving a mid-season inspection in Buffalo, New York on the 20th of July. Not one of these yielded any significant concerns, not like the Carl D. Bradley less than a decade prior. On the 26th of November, Daniel J. Morrell and Edward Dwight Townsend pulled into Buffalo, New York to offload, finishing their 33rd trip that season. This would have been their final trip of the season, but Bethlehem wasn't pleased with the season's numbers, requesting one last run from the two ships up to Taconite Harbor, Minnesota, then back to Buffalo to ensure a yearly bonus for the two crews.
See that isn't it always just sad that if the season would have ended when it was supposed to have ended, it would have ended. And it's not saying there's just greed. They were looking out for the crew members. They need, of course, the company wanted the more profits, and this crew, they wanted their bonuses for doing this work. So they decided to make one more perfectly safe, normal, regular, run-of-the-mill voyage before they wrapped up the season. And speaking of wrapping things up, let's hit these couple of super chats here. Where'd we go? All right, here we are. Flux says the power of Christ compels you. Mocha Poon, I finally finished your piece, Effie. I do love me some trans boats. Let's go. Yes, the Daniel J. Morrell. That ship's pronouns are she and her. Chris Scianti. However you pronounce your name, I'm sorry, whichever one I butchered. Or if I butchered them both, and it's something different, apologies for that too. Just finished your Batavia video. Highly recommend everyone check it out if they haven't. I appreciate that, Chris. And I would recommend everyone check out all of my Maritime Monday videos. Because why not? And if they're particularly awesome, you can leave a super thanks down there. Click the super thanks button, and you don't have to watch them live to leave things, but this isn't a grift stream, so that's all I'm going to say about that. All right, let's get back to this. Wait, did I get everything? I got everything. All right, awesome.
Captain Crawley would, of course, oblige, in spite of the worsening weather report. After ballasting down, the Morrell would depart the Buffalo Breakwater at 2300 on the 26th of November. Unfortunately for 21-year-old deck watchman John Grow and 26-year-old watchman Dennis Hale, they had arrived at the dock in Buffalo a few minutes after 2300, in time to watch the stern of their ship sailing out into a stormy Lake Erie. The two men had driven home after mooring in Buffalo, thinking the season to be over. Grow to his home in Erie, Pennsylvania, and Hale to his home in Ashtabula, Ohio. They returned to the ship as fast as possible, but had just missed it. Utilizing the radios at Coast Guard Station Buffalo, they contacted the Morrell and agreed to meet up in Windsor, Ontario, when the Morrell would be refueling, taking on 200 tons of stoker coal. So the pair were off to make the long drive. About 4 hours after the Morrell departed, her sister ship, the Townsend, followed suit, leaving Buffalo at around 0300 on the 27th of November. Arriving in Windsor before the Morrell, unbeknownst to Grow and Hale, the Morrell had beat its way across Lake Erie through rough weather and had opted to anchor out in the mouth of the Detroit River prior to proceeding upbound the channel. Anchoring out at about 1800 before radioing in to Bethlehem Transportation to let them know. In the night, the Edward Townsend would pass the anchored Morrell, heading upbound the Detroit River. In the morning hours of 0655, Morrell weighed anchor in time to make it up to Windsor to refuel. Pulling into the coal docks at 0705, Grow and Hale, by this time, had been waiting around 15 hours to board their ship.
Oh, gee, if only they had just managed to stay home. But now, being the good crewmen that they are, they went over to Windsor, Ontario, and waited for the ship. Now there it is, it's coming in 7 o'clock in the morning. Time to fuel up and begin the fateful voyage that we're here to talk about today. Just me, thank you so much for that super chat. Good look at what a dry dock does. Check out Battleship Texas current restoration. There you go. That's an idea. I assume if we just Google Battleship Texas current restoration, then we'll be regaled with all kinds of dry docking sites.
There was no way that Dennis Hale could have known that the ship he was stepping onto, the one he had served on for 3 years, would be gone in less than 24 hours.
Yikes. Oh, and JKD Buck 76 says, "Oh darn, we missed the boat." Well, thank God we can border in Soviet Kanakistan. What could go wrong? Windsor, Ontario isn't really Canada. Windsor, Ontario is just kind of Detroit. It's basically Detroit, which, hey, I guess kind of is the same thing. But also there was one thing that I forgot to mention. Lady Autumn Sky, it's your birthday today. Happy birthday to you. That's awesome. And Strong asked, what year was this? 1966 is the year this accident took place.
The Morrell had finished loading on fuel and was underway by 0730, upbound the Detroit River and passing by the city itself not long after. A ship observer passed on their position to Bethlehem Steel as they did so. Shortly after, at 0900, the Morrell contacted the company themselves for their daily position report. This would be their last. The Townsend had passed by Detroit the night before, anchoring just near Stag Island, in the St. Clair River just north of Lake St. Clair. Weather at the time had been steadily worsening, and the captain of the Townsend, Captain Thomas J. Connolly, didn't want to venture out into Lake Huron just yet. They anchored at around 0400 on the 28th. By 1300 that day, the Daniel J. Morrell passed her sister ship at anchor, Captain Crawley discussing over the radio with Captain Connolly the worsening weather report, considering the noon forecast and what it held for them. Both deciding their vessels could handle it so long as they maintained a northerly course upbound Lake Huron. The weather was due to be coming from the north, putting their bows into the sea. So long as they did this and perhaps hugged the western shore, staying close to Michigan, they believed the vessels would ride it out just fine. The wind at the time of this call was out of the west and light, anywhere between 5 and 15 knots. At 1453, Townsend pulled the hook and proceeded north out of the mouth of the St. Clair River and onto Lake Huron.
All right, so at about little after 2 in the afternoon, although the weather's just like Gilligan's Island, the weather started getting rough. The giant ships were being tossed. Still, it wasn't bad enough to not have a voyage, so they decided to head out of the river into the lakes. And David said it's where everyone, talking about Windsor, Ontario, is where everyone goes to drink at 18. That is hilariously true. Two of my best friends here in Korea are from Windsor, Ontario, and that's what they both said. That was their stories, that everybody from Detroit would come over
into the waiting jaws of a November storm. At the time, Captain Connolly wasn't sitting idly by. Instead, he was listening in to conversations on the radio, discussions of vessels on the topic of weather, most reporting relatively light winds, the highest being 24 knots. Connolly contacted Crawley to inform him he was falling in behind him, and they proceeded north, estimating the two ships to be about 20 nautical miles distant, as Crawley reported having just passed the Lake Huron lightship. There was a long period of silence as the two ships steamed their way into the darkening skies. Aboard the Morrell, Dennis Hale would be performing his last 4 to 8 deck watch aboard the ship, inspecting the holds.
And he's talking about the 4 to 8 deck watch that Dennis Hale is holding. Normally, in a standard situation on board these commercial liners, the crew will work 4 hours on, 4 hours off, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. So if your duty would be like noon to 4, and then no, that's not what I meant to say at all. It'd be like noon to 4, and then midnight to 4. So it'd be twice a day. Work 4, rest 8. Work 4, rest 8. That's what I meant to say. So you work noon to 4, then midnight to 4, like that. That would be your work schedule. And so he's beginning his last 4-hour work schedule.
At and around 1600, he would enter the cargo hold and find about 18 inches of water on deck. Nothing too terribly concerning, as the side tanks were known to leak and had visible holes in the sides of them. Dennis reported these to the master, who acknowledged them and showed no major level of concern. At 2000, Dennis was off watch and remembered the ship was riding well. The winds were growing stronger quickly, though, as the barometer dropped rapidly. 30 knots and steadily climbing, with seas of about 8 feet, or 2.5 meters. But in spite of this, Dennis was able to walk along the spar decks, heading aft to the galley for dinner before heading back forward to his cabin to get some.
And they said the winds were at 30 knots. That's about 56 kilometers an hour, or about 35 miles an hour. That's what the winds were then, like 35 miles an hour and about 56 kilometers per hour at this point.
Some sleep before his next watch. His cabin was located below the forward pilot house next to the anchor windlass.
That's right here.
He remembers hearing the anchor lightly banging against the hull, but admits to not being awoken by the motion of the vessel or the sounds of the weather. In the pilot house above him, though, tense communications between the Morrell and Townsend would be sent back and forth into the night. As the ship steadily steamed north out into Huron, the weather only worsened, and their forward progress only slowed. The winds blew harshly from the north, the entirety of the lake's fetch only assisting in growing the wave height significantly. By 2200, Connolly was talking to Crawley about his concerns of the deteriorating weather conditions. By this time, the winds had steadily grown to nearly 45 knots from the north, and the seas had built up to 12 feet, or 3.6 meters, with crest distances of anywhere between 250 and 300 feet apart.
And so now again, it's just been a short period of time, but the winds have already increased to 45 knots, which is like 83 kilometers an hour, or about 51 miles an hour. So now you're starting to get into some pretty high winds on a lake. Kyle Bogue, yes, we've done the Edmund Fitzgerald. We talked about it a little bit here at the beginning. Go back several months in my Maritime Monday playlist, and it will be there.
The storms also showed no signs of slowing, only gaining in potency as the ships twisted and slammed into oncoming swells. Their forward progress had dropped to a crawl, sometimes only managing a measly 4 knots ahead. They wouldn't be sailing through this anytime soon. At this time, Captain Connolly restricted all the spar decks, forbidding any crew from walking out onto the weather decks. 23:15, winds and seas were reaching a fevered pitch. Winds up to 55 knots and seas reaching a steady 20 foot or 6 meters, with the occasional 25 footer or 7.6 meters. Green water crashing onto the pilot house. The weather was just getting worse as the empty freighters flexed and shuddered.
See, and that's an important thing. They're empty. Being empty, they're going to ride higher in the water. They're not going to be sitting low in the water. with like a low center of gravity, and being lighter, they're going to be more affected by the waves. And I mean, at the ocean, I think we've shown some videos, and I think you may have seen them on your own, where you get these massive ocean swells, or where you get these ships that'll go up, 30 feet or 10 meters, or even get up like these massive waves, and then it'll just slowly, the ship will crash back down into the trough. And then a little bit later, the next massive wave will come by, and then it'll crash down into the trough, and you get this motion, this rising and falling roller coaster motion. But on the lakes, I mean, it's this same way, on pretty much every lake. Just because of the size, you can't build up these waves that will literally travel for thousands of miles, and you pick up in intensity. You get these choppy little things. So even though the waves are high, they're coming really, really quickly, one after another. So instead of just like the big up, boom, up, boom, you just get this boom, 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 and that puts a lot of stress on the hulls of the ships, and particularly if they're empty like this.
On one or two occasions, Captain Connolly suggested to Captain Crawley that they turn back, heading either to Thunder Bay to anchor or back south to Port Huron. But Crawley didn't agree. Far too concerned that if they tried to come about, their lighter vessels would broach and get caught in the trough of the seas, unable to come about and at risk of capsizing. On top of that, turning about wouldn't remove them from their troubles. With stern seas, they ran the risk of their props coming out of the water with each passing wave.
There's two things there. One, turning sideways, so you're parallel with the waves, and one, your propellers coming out of the water. Two big problems. We can answer this one really quickly. Bodacious asks, how did you get into maritime law? My last year of law school, a maritime law firm offered me a job, and I said yes. So that's kind of how that happened. But so what's going to happen is, if you're going up with the waves, we'll have to try to describe this as best I can here. The waves are coming this way, and if you're going directly in the waves, you go up and over. So you want to always be going into the waves. So as the waves come up, you ride the waves and come down. If they wanted to return home, then they're going to be broadside to the waves. And what happens there is the ship is coming, the waves come, and then it does that. So yeah, if you cut above the waves, fine. Always go into the waves. You're parallel, then you roll up on the side of the wave, and then they can capsize you. So that's why one of the reasons why they decided to keep going. Epic origin story. I need to make up a better story, but that's the truth. The other problem is the propeller coming out of the water, because they're light, they're empty, so they're going to be riding higher in the waves. And as they go through the waves or above the waves, when the trough comes, it will go under the propeller, which means the propeller is just spinning in the air, which essentially you lose maneuverability for an instant, and that's it. You can't go forward. You can't steer. You get to do nothing for that brief period of time. And as long as that's out, your overall maneuverability is extremely limited. The propeller should always be underwater. That's how it propels you through the water, is by being under the water. And if it's out, it's not propelling you anywhere and is just making it harder, if not impossible, to steer. So those were the two concerns they were having right now. If they turn around, they'll be parallel to the waves and they could capsize, and their propeller would be coming up out of the water, which would affect their overall maneuverability,
overtaxing their engines. On top of that, the quartering seas would cause more twisting and flexing to the ship. In his mind, staying the course was the best bet. As if to confirm his fears whilst on the radio at 2350, he and Connolly were forced to disconnect as the Townsend was ripped off its course by a sudden, violent, harsh winds. Grabbing the bow of the ship like a sail and forcing it to veer hard to starboard, threatening to send the vessel broadside to the winds and seas. Only by increasing power and forcing the rudder hard to port was he able to stop the spin, the vessel coming about nearly 30 degrees off course before finally counteracting it.
Oof. How would that be when I mean, this thing is massive. It's over 600 feet. It's over 200 meters. Well, it's a little less than 200 meters. But the winds are so strong that it's regardless of what you want to do, it's now spinning you to where you're going to be parallel to the waves and possibly flipped over. So they went through the Townsend went somewhere else. It was under the influence of the winds. It drifted off, and the Morrell is left to fight its damnedest to not get into this spin, to counteract this spin. Oh, all right, y'all want to see the video? All right, well, that's good. We'll show you some video. How about that? I always forget about that when I that's why you'll notice, and a lot of people go, make it bigger when you talk. Every time I am big in myself and remove the video and I talk, I always forget to put it, because I'm looking at the video. I just forget to bring it back up for you guys. So hey, there we go. There. That's why I always leave it like this. All right. So anywho, as I was saying, the wind is blowing this ship around, and the captain is doing absolutely everything within his power to make sure that they don't spin parallel with the waves and flip.
At midnight 15 on the 29th of November, Captain Connolly contacted Captain Crawley to inform him of what had happened. Crawley explaining that he had had a similar event just happen. The two kept the conversation brief, too preoccupied on staying on course to keep on the call. Crawley hung up, and it was the last transmission ever received by the Daniel J. Morrell. At or around 2 in the morning, Dennis Hale is awoken by a loud thump, to which he incorrectly attributed it to the anchor pounding against the hull. A second reverberated through his cabin, sending the book sitting on his wall-mounted bookcase tumbling to the deck. A startled and slightly irritated Hal went to turn on the lights in his rack and found it didn't work. What he didn't realize just yet was that the entire forward section of the ship was without power. Suddenly, the battery-powered general emergency alarm sounds throughout the ship. Hale springs out of his rack and grabs a life vest before running half-naked out of his cabin to the weather deck. The deck strewn with melting snow, Dennis realized two things. There was no power, and he couldn't see the stern of the Morrell.
Yeah, this is where the story starts to get wild and crazy. So yeah, he's asleep in his his cabin is basically right here. You see, right next to the anchor. So he's up here next to the anchor, and that's why he thinks that first thud was the anchor banging against the hull. And then it happens again, and all the power goes out, and he's like, "Oh crap!" Goes up, and he can't see the back of the vessel. He can't see the stern. Why can't he see the stern of the vessel? Because it's not there. But it'll be back. Just wait.
Then a moment later, he could. It rose up as if right from the sea, still fully illuminated with power. Dennis watched as the center of the ship hogged and sagged, a growing tear down the middle sparking as the two sections rubbed against one another. Grasping the dire nature of what was happening, Dennis ran back into his cabin to try and grab some kind of clothing to cover himself from the elements.
So, all right, now I got to remember to bring the video back up. So essentially he's looking out, but the ship is doing, he's up here in this part, and the ship is like this in the water. And then suddenly he sees it do this. And so and these parts are just grinding against each other. So now you've got the aft of the ship, the stern of the ship that's fully powered. And by fully powered means the propeller is still running. And all the electricity is on, riding up above the front end of the ship. And now he's trying to save himself.
Elements. In the darkness, he could only find a Navy-style pea coat. It would have to do. He ran back out on deck, clad in only the jacket, a life vest, and boxer shorts. Assembled by the pontoon-style life raft were all the crew of the forward section of the ship, including the captain and the two mates. They sat by the raft, some tying themselves down to the pontoon-style float, all in various levels of dress and varying degrees of shock. Dennis looked to the back deck as the ship tore down the middle.
Hey, guess what? I
like
forgot to do it again, didn't I? I forgot to do it again. Damn it. I swear to God, I am never, ever going to take the video away. Ever, ever again. God dang it. Okay, just for that, I'm not going to show you the video. You can just listen to the audio. I meant to do this. It's all part of my plan. Oh, I am never ever. I told you to remind me before I did this, not call me boomer after. Look out for future me. All right, let's just go back here a little bit while they talk about getting the clothes and finding what clothes they can, and let's go again. And as long as we're doing that, we should talk about the new poll I put up 26 minutes ago with 265 votes. Hey, for the 500 viewers that are here now is a good time to hit that like button. If you found anything in my last two boomerisms here to like, you just have to understand.
Boomer!
Hit that like button and subscribe button and go over and take the poll. I hit the like and subscribe button and took the poll again because my vote matters. We look out for you, idiot Lorax. We have a high tolerance for you, and the power of Christ compelled me. Now let's see if I can make it slower, make it smaller without dismissing the poll this time. All right. There we go. Do you have a name for your mustache? No, I don't. We let the ladies name it as they see fit. All right, let's get back to this. The video is up, and I promise that's the last time. Let's go.
Pulled by the pontoon-style life raft were all the crew of the forward section of the ship, including the captain and the two mates. They sat by the raft, some tying themselves down to the pontoon-style float, all in various levels of dress and varying degrees of shock. Dennis looked to the back deck as the ship tore down the middle, like a sheet of paper, as he described it. He saw no one on the after section. The aft raft was untouched, and neither of the lifeboats had been lowered. The captain mentioned that the radios hadn't worked, meaning no distress calls had been made, but that there was another vessel just off the port bow and the Townsend not far behind them. As the ship tore apart, the crew sitting on the raft watched 38-year-old oiler Donald Wooster step out onto the aft deck. He stood there holding an oil can, staring straight ahead at the disaster developing before his eyes, giving no indication that he comprehended it at all, watching silent and stone-faced as the Morrell tore herself apart before his very eyes. What was there to say? What was there to do? It's hard to imagine what could have possibly been going through the man's head as the ship split up and sank from beneath his feet. Finally, after much flexing and tearing, the sections were torn apart. The stern section, still under power, began to push the foundering forward section out of the way, ramming into it repeatedly and jostling the men in the raft.
Well, Bodacia says he seems very focused on how naked people were. Yeah, because it's the middle of the night in winter, in a snowstorm, in some of the coldest waters there are, the Great Lakes in November. I mean, if they're all wearing gigantic parkas and life-saving suits and heated whatevers, they're not gonna go this badly for them. But yeah, in great states of undress, just piling out of their cabins, trying to figure out what happened. They get out on deck, and the ship is literally tearing itself into two pieces.
The bow was sinking as it was forced sideways by the wind, and its severed aft section running into it. Finally, Hale sat on the raft, staring in fear as the aft section came charging forward. Lights still illuminated its massive, now wide-open cargo hold. Severed steam lines billowed steam into the yawning cavern of the hold as the ship steamed forward. It looked like the open mouth of a great beast trying to swallow the crew whole. Dennis was certain that the aft section would run them over and kill them all.
Yeah, because remember, the front end is without power, without radio, without anything. But this aft section is still under power. It is still moving and going. So now everybody over here is worried that this gigantic back section is going to plow into them and kill everybody on board the ship. They're literally being chased through the water by a part of themselves. I don't know how you would be able to wrap your mind around that scenario. Like he was just talking about the guy that was just standing on deck with an oil can in his hand, watching the ship get ripped apart. Because, how do you process that? Yeah, and Robin Losey says the Great Lakes aren't necessarily warm in the summer. True. So That's one thing they've got to process. And somebody asked if I'm going to be doing the Anderson trial later. Yes, we'll be starting up that in about 40 minutes from now. But back to the ship.
But as it rammed them, they were struck by a wave, and the group of about 15 men were swept overboard into the frigid lake water. Dennis was sent tumbling into the dark water, coughing and sputtering as he came up just 10 feet from the dislodged raft, now bobbing in the water near him. He saw no one on the surface with him, but just focused on swimming to the raft. By the time he got there were two others that also climbed aboard. 41-year-old deckhand Arthur Stojek and 20-year-old deckhand John J. Cleary. They helped the shocked and already numbed Dennis Hale climb aboard. Stojek was wearing only his thin pajamas and a life jacket, whilst Cleary wore only jeans and a sweater with a life jacket. All three of them were very ill-suited for an extended period of time on the raft. As Dennis crawled over to the deck box installed in the life raft to check their supplies, the others called out at seeing someone else in the water. They helped in pulling aboard 42-year-old wheelman Charles Fuzzy Fossbender. The man had been in the pilot house at the time of the sinking and was fully dressed, making him a bit more prepared for this than the others. The first order of business on the raft was getting signaling devices and getting rescued. If the captain was right, there was a ship not too far away. The four men beat and bashed the box, which was dented upon being swept overboard. Once they had it open, they scrambled for the contents. Hale took out the flare gun and a pair of parachute flares. In all the excitement, a pair of the precious flares were washed overboard. He fired off two of the flares before the handle and barrel of the flare gun broke into two pieces, forcing him to have to hold them together to fire them. Their small raft was being buffeted about in the heavy seas and winds. Hale looked to set up the sea anchor and storm oil for some stability. Storm oil being a canister set inside a sea anchor that slowly lets out oil to cover the surface of the water around a life raft, possibly calming the seas a bit and keeping down the spray whipped up by the wind. But to his chagrin, Art Stojek had tossed the can of oil overboard, thinking it worthless.
Oops.
Already he was speaking nonsense, succumbing to shock and already hypothermic. Then one of the men began to scream and wave his arms. The Morell's foresection had finally sank. From the time of Hale waking up to around the time he entered the water, it had been around 8 minutes. The foresection hadn't floated much longer. Fully submerged, Fuzzy said he saw a rescue ship a little more than a mile away.
So there's some perspective for you. All this stuff we've been talking about, from the time he woke up to going out on deck, to watching the ship get ripped apart, to being flung into the ocean, to swimming to a life raft, to watching the foresection of the ship sink, it's about 10 minutes. You got 10 minutes to get your shit together and do anything you possibly can to save your life. I mean, just think right now, whatever situation you're in right now, someone says you've got 8 minutes to get everything together you need to survive on the water in a snowstorm in the middle of winter, wearing exactly what you're wearing now. You've got 10 minutes. What are you going to do? I mean, they do drills for these things for a reason. They drill evacuations. They drill emergencies. They drill, collisions. They drill. So hopefully these actions they need to take are just second nature. And think, not only is it only 8 minutes from the time he woke up to the time he went in water, how long is it going to take you to walk the length of 2 football fields? If you were going from the front to the back, there's a lot of real estate to cover just to get out of where you are. I mean, it's not a good situation, obviously.
Hale looked and sadly told the man that it was just the stern section of the Morrell. Still under power, still steaming off into the storm, stuck in the trough as it plows on without direction or purpose. A chicken with its head cut off. At least 14 men still possibly on board, with not a clue of how to get off it. The stern section would continue on this way for 5 nautical miles and nearly 45 minutes before sinking.
Jeez.
No one aboard the stern section would survive, and we'll never know just what they had done in those final moments. Hale popped another flare for the men to huddle around for warmth as they sat around, discussing their chances as it began to snow. They decided they were better off in the raft than anyone else. They settled in for a long, cold night. No distress call had been made, and no one was presently looking for them. So how long could they survive out there in the cold, drenched and half naked? By morning time, after a tormenting night in the sea spray and snow, dawn slowly broke at about 7:30, and the weather was calming, the snow ebbing. Laying on his side facing John Cleary, Hale could see his face was pale and some foam was coming from his mouth. Dennis jabbed him to wake him up, asking, "John, are you all right?" He didn't respond.
Nope.
John Cleary, at age 20, was the second youngest aboard the Morrell. He had passed away in the night, likely from hypothermia. He had survived less than 5 hours. Hale rolled over. Behind him was Art Stojic, who also didn't respond. He too had passed away in the night. Terrified that he was now alone, he called out to Fuzzy, who was positioned near Dennis's legs. He thankfully responded, saying he was okay and had been praying through the night. The pair talked a little through the day, discussing their chances and what they'd do when they were rescued and made it home. By 9 o'clock, Daniel J. Morrell had officially gone 24 hours since the Bethlehem Steel Company had contacted them. They were overdue for their radio position call. But
see, if you recall, there wasn't the ability to send out a distress signal, a rescue made. There was no time. So suddenly, I mean, you can't just go, "Oh my God, mayday, mayday, mayday." This is where we are, and we're breaking up, and we need an immediate rescue because the power is out, the radios aren't working, your ship is tearing itself apart that fast. So the only way that people realized something was wrong was they didn't show up on time. They didn't show up where they were supposed to be. And it's like, "Oh, they're overdue. They're late. Perhaps we should go looking for them."
But they had just been through a bad storm. Vessels were being reported as having topside damage from wind and ice. So when the Morrell didn't report in, no major alarms were raised. They likely just didn't have functioning radios, so the company waited. Aboard the raft, Fuzzy told Dennis that he could see land. Dennis asked if they were close. Fuzzy stated plainly that they weren't. The Michigan shore was in sight, but may as well have been the moon for the two freezing, tired men. Fuzzy had slowly developed a nasty cough that had only gotten worse through the day. What Hale wasn't aware of was that the man had been crushed by something when being swept overboard. His lungs were filling with blood. As they drifted closer to shore, Hale could make out houses. They'd be grounded soon. He told Fuzzy, "Maybe someone will see us," to which Fuzzy responded, "Well, they better hurry because it feels like my lungs are filling up." To which Hale suggested trying to cough whatever it was up. Charles Fossbender attempted just that, coughing and hacking to no effect. Shortly after, he slumped to the deck of the raft, lifeless. He passed away around 1400 on the 29th, leaving Dennis alone on the raft, the lone survivor of the Daniel J. Morrell. He quietly settled in as the sun started to set. He'd be on the life raft for yet another night, alone on a lake with no one around even looking for him. By nightfall, the raft had grounded and was bumping up against the rocks, but was still about 100 yards from shore. There was no way that Dennis could wade to shore in his exhausted state, so he lay there, at one point the raft rotating so he could see the lights from a nearby farmhouse. He screamed in vain, hoping someone would hear him, to no avail. Later in the night, the lights went out, and Dennis settled into fits of restless sleep. He had now been on the raft for more than 24 hours. By 9 o'clock the next...
Oh my God, can you just even imagine that? And the end of this video has a little bit of an interview with Dennis Hale. I mean, can you imagine having you're dying of hypothermia on this raft, and you can see a freaking farmhouse, but you just can't get there. You can't get anybody's attention, and you're just floating there. Even what caused it to break? Just the bad weather. It was 66 years old. Bad storm. Just one of those things.
Next morning, the Morrell had missed yet another radio call-in, making it 2 days since they had been in contact with Bethlehem Steel directly. Concerns were raised, but yet again the alarm wasn't sounded. The Townsend should have been right on its tail, and they hadn't yet made it to the St. Mary's River. But soon, a bit before noon, the Edward White Townsend pulled into the Lime Island fueling dock in the St. Mary's River. Captain Connolly was informed of 45 inches of water in the holds, as well as a massive crack on the starboard side of the ship on the weather decks. He realized that the Morrell hadn't pulled into the St. Mary's River and immediately called Bethlehem. Finally, at 12:15, Bethlehem contacted the Coast Guard Rescue Coordination Center in Cleveland, reporting the Daniel J. Morrell missing, a search being launched immediately, 30 hours after the Morrell had sank. Multiple cutters and vessels set out to search, including the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Mackinac, Coast Guard cutter Bramble, and the Coast Guard cutter Acacia. Small boats from stations Harbor Beach, Port Huron, and Saginaw River all set out to search. And both fixed-wing and rotary aircraft from Air Station Detroit and Traverse City set out to search. Before the search had even officially begun, the Coast Guard small boat 30386 from Station Harbor Beach had found a body at around 12:10. The body was floating wearing a life vest with Daniel J. Morrell stenciled across the back. The debris and bodies would slowly start to be found by the search assets over the next few hours. On the raft, Dennis barely clung to life, dying of thirst, hypothermia, and exhaustion. Over the past 36 hours, he had lost 25 pounds. Blood was pooling in his legs, and he had frostbite in several places. He was hallucinating and drifting in and out of consciousness. Some would later paint his ordeal as a beautiful human will to survive, a defiance against death, and a dedication to perseverance. But Dennis would later in life fully denounce that. The man was hopeless, often begging for death. On one occasion, he remembers sticking his fingers down his throat, trying to choke himself to death in a desperate bid for release, to which he only managed to make himself gag. He admitted that he didn't want to live. He didn't want to die, he just wanted it to be over. By 1600, Dennis was stirred to consciousness, hearing what he thought were seagulls overhead. The birds had been a constant irritant. But looking up, he realized it was in fact a Coast Guard helicopter that had spotted his raft with the bodies of his shipmates and himself aboard.
40
As
hours.
the helo landed, the Coast Guardsman was shocked to find Dennis alive after 36 hours of being on the raft. Dennis could only say, "I love you," over and over as they brought him on board and flew him to the closest hospital. His odds of survival still extremely low. So low was it, in fact, that upon entering him into the hospital, he was given a priest to talk to and to issue him his last rites. Dennis spoke to the man, even telling him of his hallucinations. He remembers being lifted from his body, taken up high above the lake, and ending up back upon the deck of the Daniel J. Morrell.
I mean, listen to this hallucination. My God. I mean, like I said, this guy, he was trying to choke himself to death. And see, that's what I like. People will tell him what he was thinking. They did that whole, it's the great will to survive. The human nature, the human tenacity, the will of the spirit to overcome and survive. And he's like, "Nah, bro, I was trying to choke myself to death with my fingers because I just wanted to be out of this situation." So he didn't want to die. He just didn't want to continue in that situation. And then he's hallucinating. This is just a gut-wrenching hallucination. Ugh.
Even telling him of his hallucinations. He remembers being lifted from his body, taken up high above the lake, and ending up back upon the deck of the Daniel J. Morrell, alongside all of his shipmates, who greeted each other again with elation, until finally one looked at Dennis, asking him why he was there, and that he wasn't supposed to be there yet. He spoke of seeing a white-robed man standing on his raft, with kind eyes and a beard. The man warned Dennis not to eat the ice from his coat, like a father scolding a child, telling him the ice would lower his body temp and he would die. To all of this, the priest cautioned him to perhaps not speak of these things.
Hallucination or vision? You decide.
Something that deeply cut Dennis, perhaps attributing to his silence after the incident, speaking only to the Coast Guard about the incident, not breaking his silence for 25 years. As bodies were pulled from the lake, several were left with the burning question: how did this happen? How had a steel freighter sunk on the lakes in a storm yet again, for the second time in less than a decade? Something had to be found out. This couldn't happen again. 60 dead between the Morrell and the Bradley, and only 3 survivors between them. A tribunal launched from the recently formed NTSB, or National Transportation Safety Board, picked over everything. Testimony from Hale, Past captains, past crews, old inspections, old damage, not a stone left unturned. Then finally the smoking gun, the deck of the Townsend, cracked and damaged. The sister ship of the Morrell and its closest living relative, for 2 years after she would sit in the St. Mary's River, living evidence of what had occurred. It was revealed through her the fatal flaw of long-deck freighters in the cold water. The steel used in them prior to 1948 were of poorer quality, having a high sulfur content. When in cold conditions, the steel became brittle and inflexible. This, combined with the twisting force of the storm, had snapped the Morrell in half, like it had done with the Carl D. Bradley before this, and nearly done to the Townsend. The Townsend would never sail under her own power again. A few years later, her hulk was purchased by a scrap company in Europe. She was towed out the St. Lawrence Seaway, but along the way, she was subjected to a North Atlantic storm. In a fashion shockingly similar to her sister, the Edward White Townsend would snap in half whilst under tow.
How about that? Picked up for a scrapper. It's being towed off to a scrapyard, and it snaps in half and sinks on the way to the scrap heap. I mean, it sucks if you're the guy who bought that ship for scrap. You just lost your scrap. But yeah, there you go.
Forcing the crew to cut her loose and let her sink. The empty freighter slipping down below the waves in the vicinity relatively near to the last resting place of the RMS Titanic. Dennis Hale suffered in silence for many years after the incident, racked with survivor's guilt to which he'd never truly recover from. He required numerous surgeries after this on his legs.
That's Dennis Hale here, the only survivor of this incident.
But many believed his lack of clothing and large stature had attributed it to his survival. The wet clothing would have likely only kept him cold. He still needed most of his toes amputated, though. Dennis finally broke his silence 25 years after the incident, going on to have talks and even writing a book on the tragedy, sole survivor Dennis Hale's own story. In 2009, he went out on a dive boat to the side of the sunken Morrell. Standing on board as divers went below to video the wreck. At one point, a plastic rope was handed to him. It was connected to the bow of the Morrell. After 43 years, he was finally connected to the ship and the 28 shipmates he had left behind. The crew of the dive boat stepped back, leaving the emotional man to his thoughts. Dennis Hale passed away on the 2nd of September, 2015, at the age of 75.
King Ginger says, have you seen the movie Ghost Ship? Ghost Ship's that's a classic. That's a great film. There was a remake. The remake sucks. The original is great. But see, this guy, if you listen to his story, and if you go look at some of these interviews that he did, this guy was gutted his entire life. I'm gonna make one more effort at this. I'm gonna cover up the video so I don't see it. This guy, Dennis Hale, was devastated and crushed for his entire life after the priest told him not to talk about his experiences. People might think he's crazy or whatnot. Ulick says hallucination. Ulick sick. E says hallucination or vision. Are you a mystic, sir? Yeah, he talks a lot about having the just overwhelming survivor's guilt for his entire life. Literally constant nightmares, sleepless nights, racking guilt, depression. And like I said, he didn't talk about this for 25 years. And until things were kind of reaching a critical point in his life. And I believe it was I can't remember who it was. I believe it was maybe a therapist or somebody who said, you have got to speak about this. You've got to let this out. You can't keep this. So you've got to let it out and do a service to your fellow crewmen. And from that point on, he became a public speaker, and it was incredibly cathartic and healing and freeing for him. And so I mean, just just to have to go through all of that by yourself, and then to have someone tell you not to talk about parts of it because people might think you're crazy. That guy literally went through hell. I can't imagine, like I said, the survivor's guilt that would be going on in your life through that entire thing. And there's some of the lectures on YouTube. There's a couple of stories, short documentaries about him. Plus, he's got this own book. So the one I really, really wanted to play it, but thanks, Nicholas Holbrook. I was literally just in the middle of doing that. I covered the video, so I couldn't do this. But go and look at some of these things. The one I wanted to, there's a really, really good one, good documentary. It's just full of copyrighted music. So copyrighted music, that's the correct term. Copyrighted music. So there's no way I could have shown it.
Thanks for listening into another episode of Maritime Horrors. I know this one's coming a lot later. It's been a while since I've uploaded, and I appreciate everyone for hanging around and being patient.
This is Maritime Horrors.
I'd like to thank all my patrons and all that who have been, I'm sure, chomping at the bit, waiting for some sort of content to come out. So I'm sorry this took so long, but I wanted to do justice for this topic, and I wanted it to be good. I kind of got inside my own head, kind of worrying about making this the best that I could.
God damn it.
But I promise you there's a lot more content lined up, some very interesting collaborations that I'm very excited for, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I promise it will not take this long to come out with another episode. I'd like to thank Windigoon, who gave me an awesome shout-out. I've been talking to him a bit. He's a really cool dude. He does some great content. If you're not hear from him, I definitely suggest checking out his channel. With him giving me that shout out, I'd like to return the love. There is a smaller channel that did a video on the Daniel J. Morrell that was fantastic. That channel name is Ship Geek, exploring maritime disasters and triumphs. I'll link that.
Legal Vices
definitely check him out. He's a smaller channel, but he makes very good content. Give him some love and try to get him up to some good numbers too. We are very, very close to 100K, and that's incredible. I never expected to get this far. So hopefully this video bumps us up above that, because that would be fantastic. Right now, we have some new shirts up on the TeePublic that the channel artist made, and they're absolutely awesome. If you want to support her, every t-shirt, anything you buy from that goes directly to her and helps pay her for the fantastic job that she does for the channel. We're also working maybe on some interesting other things to buy. If you're a fan of patches, I got some good news to you. We got some cool patches that are coming out, and those will be available very, very soon, so watch out for those. Other than that, that's all I have for you, so fair winds and following seas, shipmates.
So that's my next goal. We had Sam from Brick and Mortar on here a month or so ago. Maritime Horrors guy. That's my next goal, getting him on. That would be fun to have him on, because we've used a lot of his videos, and he's got some great stuff. And I'm just grateful that he's let me use so many of his videos without copyright striking me and crushing me. I'm just so terrified of that. Because YouTube is so damn arbitrary. Oof. Again, we look at this. It was 1958 that the Carl D. Bradley went down. 8 years later, the Bradley went down on 18 November. 8 years later, on 29 November, the Morrell goes down. 8 years later, 9 years later, the Edmund Fitzgerald goes down on November 10th. The Great Lakes were a dangerous place to be, and still are to a certain extent. And they were legendary racing here with the $5. What's worse than Jeff's boomerisms? His drunk math skills. 7 pre-made fight milks. 5 to Brandon. 2 to Mike Morrison. 2 to John Morris. John Morris, we broke up because we were out of fight milk, so we got him covered. I got everything done. We ran out of fight milk, but that's a different story for a different day. They were talking about how the steel that was used at that time, when the weather was particularly cold, it was more brittle and less flexible. That's sort of what happened with the space shuttle. that exploded due to an O-ring that became brittle when the temperature dropped. A couple things here. Parallel Jen says you can actually rent a room and go on a few of the freighters for the run. That's actually true. It's something that's not known very well, and some travel agencies are aware of it. But you can a lot of times go directly to the shipping company's web pages, and you can actually book a room on one of these giant commercial vessels and sail from point A to point B fairly cheaply. It takes you a month to get where you're going, but it's fascinating because you're very well taken care of. And you eat with the captain a lot of times. You eat a lot of things that the normal crew wouldn't be. You get treated very, very well, and they're very, very luxurious accommodations on some of these ships. So yeah, that's something if you're interested in it, go and do. That's something I always wanted to do. I always wanted to look into it. I used to look into it a lot, but maybe in like 10 years or so when I retire and have nothing else better to do with my life, I'll do that. But yeah, I just can't take a month or two off of work now. And what would I do with you, YouTube folks? I couldn't leave you alone for a month. So that is an option. If that's something that's interesting, you want to actually ride one of these now that you've seen, you want to sail in one of these now that you've watched all my Maritime Monday shows, go ahead. I mean, it is safe. I mean, think of how many thousands and thousands and thousands of ships there are out there, and how often death results from anything that goes on. But when it does, it happens on a grand scale. That's kind of the big problem. It's like the who was it Bobcat Goldthwait? One of the comedians, I think it was Bobcat Goldthwait, said that they say that driving your car is more dangerous than flying. But yeah, when your car engine stalls, you don't fall 35,000 feet. It's kind of the same thing with ships. The accidents are less likely to happen, but when they happen, that's the result. And Fondian says, having been on an 80-foot crew in 20-foot seas at 7 seconds intervals on a deck evacuating an oil rig, I can say those waves hurt. Yeah, and that's how. Assuming it's an oil rig on the ocean, maybe it's in the Gulf or in one of the lakes, but I mean, that's one of the distinctions about the Great Lakes and other navigable lakes like that. You don't get these swells that come every 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds. You just have these waves, boom, 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 boom. And they are jarring. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of another Maritime Monday. Eva Blink says, my luck, I would end up on Maritime Monday if I took a ship. That's a very interesting thing. Notes on a Plane says, if you want to see how dangerous life on the sea is, go to any church in a fishing community. All right, it's time to kind of wrap things up here, and so I can get ready for the next stream. 10 minutes from now, we will start the Zachariah Anderson murder trial. We're on day 5 of that. So we'll do a 30-minute wind up. We'll get ready for that, and then the trial will start at the top of the hour, and then hopefully, I think Chandler Remington, she'll be joining us, and I've set out some other invites to other people that may be joining us, and then Ozzy Overlord will join us whenever he shows up, whenever he wakes up, and then we'll send things over to him at the lunch break. So until next week, until it's time for yet another Maritime Monday, I just want to let you know what's coming up between now and then. Tomorrow is an important day, and I'm going to give you some Law Racks Legal Vices homework. Tomorrow, we're going to have a special guest for at least an hour and a half. Stephen N. Gosney will be on here tomorrow for Steve Gosney Out for Justice Part 2. A few weeks ago, we watched a video of one of Steve Gosney, Florida appellate lawyer, with assistant public defender, doing an appeals case. We watched the appellate case. We watched his arguments. We read some of his appellate brief and whatnot. Now tomorrow he's going to be on the channel. He's going to be here in chat to talk about that case and to answer any questions that any of you have, because there was a lot of questions that people had when that came up when we were just watching the video. And I said, I don't know, you'll have to ask Steve. Well, Steve's coming on to talk about that and answer any other questions you have regarding that case or any other case. So to participate fully in the Steve Gosney appearance tomorrow, go back and find the video, Steve Gosney Out for Justice, and watch that video, because he'll be here to talk about that tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern time, as always. And that'll be the run up to the Anderson trial tomorrow. So tomorrow will be Stephen N. Gosney, then the murder trial. Wednesday will be the murder trial. Thursday will be O.J. Simpson murder trial, and then the murder trial. And Friday will be more of the murder trial. And we should be getting close to the end of the murder trial by that point. And I just want to have a moment of silence before we leave, because today was the day that the Taylor Ship business trial was supposed to have started. We'll just have to wait for some Taylor Ship business. But there is going to be a competency hearing later this morning. So at some point during the murder trial, we may get some news about Taylor Ship business's competency. So, all right, everybody, go back in time and watch the Steve Gosney Out for Justice, and then come tomorrow prepared with all of your questions and things you have for him regarding that case and anything else you want to ask him. It's going to be just an open forum, open discussion with Steve, but it's going to center around that. Yes, Kaiser Pineapple. Go check out Kaiser Pineapple's channel too. Cool stuff. A moment of silence for the Ship business trial that would have been. Well, we'll know a lot more a few hours from now, once the competency hearing is over. It's scheduled, it's been rescheduled for May 15th. So yes, that is the woman who made an appearance of attacking her lawyer. We'll do a little update maybe later this week or over the weekend on her. So, all right, everybody, take care. Love you all. I got about 5 or 6, 7 minutes. While we're doing this, let me set this up so that you get funneled automatically over into my other stream. If there's anything else you guys got to say it now while I'm pulling this up. I love doing these Maritime Mondays streams with you guys. I know I say this so much, but it's just weird to me that any of you find this interesting. This to me is work. This is what I do at work, and I think, why would anybody be interested in this? But it's amazing that you do, and I appreciate you coming here and making me do this every Monday, because it's relaxing, it's fun, and I have a great time. All right, customization, redirect to myself. Awesome, I have redirected to myself. Just cause. Okay, we got DSP is innocent. What did DSP do? Tits 69. All right, I should have known better than to say that crap. You guys. Check out, where do we go here? Check out Fedorovsky's vids as well. Great stuff. Oh, that's right. Fedorovsky just started a channel just barely a while ago. So yeah, go ahead. Check out Fedorovsky's vids. Get my goddamn name right. I always do. Notes on a phone. I never say notes on a plane. Never. Notes. I never say that. What's going on with Matthew Harris? I haven't followed any of his trial. I think it's going on now, isn't it? Anyway. All righty. There we go. I got some stuff to do here in the next 5-6 minutes. So everybody get over there. What's going to happen? Again, once I push this end broadcast, whatever happens is totally outside of my control, and it's all up to YouTube. Either you're going to go to my other stream automatically, or you're going to be left here, and there's going to be a little box up there that says something's happening over at Legal Vices. Click on this and find out what it is, or whatever it says. Or you could just be left sitting here with none of those options, and you'll have to go find the other stream automatically. Again, once I hit this end broadcast, it's out of my hands. So it's not Boomer and it's not Success. It just is the universe. It's karma. It's whatever. All right, there we go, everybody. Thank you, mods, for being here. Thank you for all of you, the generous people that super chatted. Thank you for the comments. The Legal Vices Squad is the best chat on the entire internet. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe on your way out, and make sure you hit the like button, because we have finished yet another poll. We had to do 2 polls because I boomered the first one and shut it down. Today's winners are, I hit the like and subscribe button and took the poll again because 14% of you said we have a high tolerance for you. Ooh, only 14% of you have a high tolerance for me. 28% said we look out for you, idiot Lorax. I thought that was going to win. 29% of you said the power of Christ compelled me. And also with 29% of the vote, because my vote matters. Thank you so much for taking the like and subscribe poll. Now just make sure that's what you've done. See you on the flip side in a couple of minutes. Let everybody know that I'll be there 4 minutes from now, or maybe 5 or 6, but as close as possible. Take care. See you on the flip side. Bye now. Wait, that's not the one. How do you boomer and exit? I almost did that. I almost clicked the wrong end broadcast. There we go. Get out of here, everybody.